What's up everybody, Coach Milfs here, coming at you with a brand new Valorant video. And in this video, we're going to be breaking down the Vandal and how to pop off with it. Because a lot of people like to use the Vandal, they want to be good at the Vandal, but they just feel like they can't be as consistent as the Phantom. So I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about the Vandal and give you some targeted tips and tricks. But go head over to the Game Leap website right now if you want in-depth mechanical guides and in-depth agent courses where we go through step by step and show you exactly how to improve at any agent. Do yourself a favor, go check it out in the links down below. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. Now, before we jump into anything else, let's break down the damage numbers of the Vandal and talk about some things that you should know about the strengths and weaknesses of the weapon and its time to kill at various ranges and scenarios. Now, the damage is going to be consistent at any range, with it doing 160 damage to the head, 40 damage to the body, and 34 to the leg. Now, on top of this, it's going to be equivalent in cost to the Phantom at 2,900 credits. Now, the fire rate is going to be 9.75 rounds per second, which is slightly different than the 11 rounds per second of the Phantom. Now, what this means is it's going to be doing 390 damage per second in the body from any range, while if the Phantom is specifically within 15 meters or less, it's going to be doing 429 damage per second. It's going to be doing about the exact same damage per second from that 15 to 30 meters, and it's going to be doing slightly less damage per second from that 30 plus meters. Now, on top of this, aim down the sights is going to lower your recoil and spread, but it's going to lower your fire rate slightly as well. Now, the important thing that you need to understand about this, and the reason that a lot of high-level players will not aim down the sights except for very specific situations, is that if you are challenging a Vandal user, you'll both swing around the corner at the same time, but you aim down the sights and they do not, they will kill you first because their time to kill will be slightly quicker, and this is because you're aiming down the sights, thus making your fire rate slower. Now, this means if you could control it, not aim down the sights, it's always better to actually use not aim down the sights, assuming that you're hitting your shot. However, from certain ranges and in certain scenarios, aim down the sights can get you that guaranteed damage amount. So it doesn't matter if the enemy's one shot. If you want to 100% hit them, then aiming down the sight is just fine because you're going to still kill them with that one bullet if they're at 40 HP or less. Now, of course, the reason that most people are going to be using the Vandal is that it one-shots from any range. So if you're really playing for the one-shot capabilities of the weapon, if you're from longer ranges away, the fact that it has less fire rate isn't going to matter if you're just tap firing anyways. Now, based on what we learned, what does that tell us about the Vandal versus the Phantom? Well, that tells us that the Vandal is going to be actually just as fast, if not faster, at time to kill from that 15 plus meter range, or of course, if you're hitting headshots, because the Vandal will always kill with the headshot that's not a wall bang when the Phantom might not. Now, that being said, however, that's not the reason why people choose not to use the Vandal. The biggest reason that people aren't using the Vandal is that it's incredibly difficult to control. The Phantom is far easier to control via spray, and because of this, people just shy away from the Vandal in general, as the Vandal is a much more difficult weapon to control, and for those scrappy fights, it's going to be hard to convert on those kills. Now, that being said, however, if you stick to these specific tips, you're going to be able to control the Vandal and have a much more consistent time. The first thing that you need to understand is after those first 3 to 5 shots, the Vandal becomes pretty much uncontrollable. Now, yes, you could try to control your recoil in a way to convert on some amount of damage. However, if you didn't get substantial damage on the enemy, you can't hope to control your spray into a headshot, and most of the time, you should be sticking to small bursts at the very maximum on the Vandal. Now, here's some different things that you should start incorporating into your Vandal use. The first tactic that high-level players are incorporating is making sure that they're staying standing, they're not committing to any spray, and they're constantly just doing tiny little bursts, if not taps, and making themselves highly mobile. They'll do this by taking a couple shots here and taking a step to the right, taking some more shots and then taking a step to the left. They're keeping themselves highly mobile. They're not committing to any crouch because it takes longer for them to stand up and move again, and they want to maintain that mobility. And they're not committing to any sprays anyways because they really want those first few shots of accuracy. Now, like we said before, you can crouch if you've already converted on some damage, but it's usually best to convert on crouch if you've already hit some shots. And a lot of players will mess up on the Vandal where they will start spraying, they'll miss everything, they'll start trying to crouch and control their spray, but they just can never get it under control, and by then, they can pretty much get killed by any weapon in the game, because unless you convert on that headshot after you crouched, your time to kill is going to be so long that most weapons are going to be able to win the 1v1 against you. Now, another problem that comes up with people that are trying to incorporate this mobility standing style of the Vandal with a couple of bursts and movement and then stopping and a couple of bursts is they never wait long long enough to get that first shot accuracy back. There are two big things that can really mess you up when you're trying to use the Vandal, and it's not counter strafing correctly, and you're not letting that first shot accuracy come back because you're not letting that recoil compensation time completely draw out. A lot of times the Vandal is actually a gun of patience and not really speedy delivery. You're not running around the corners, running and gunning and doing some crazy stuff that sometimes people pull off with the Phantom. A lot of it is very clear, concise, and you're really trying to focus on connecting with your shots rather than trying to execute them incredibly quickly. You see, the Vandal is really going to judge you based on your fundamentals. If you don't have any of your fundamentals in order, like your movement, your patience, your counter strafing, and your crosshair placement, the Vandal is going to be a gun that's going to be a lot more difficult to convert on kills. But if you master all these things, the Vandal can be an invaluable weapon and tool to use in certain scenarios to allow you to click so many heads and just rack up the kills over and over again. Now, if you really analyze some people, some of the top Vandal users in the world, someone like Tens, what he'll often use the Vandal as is something like a tap firing gun, much more similar to the Guardian than the Phantom, but it has the close range flexibility to actually spray a little bit if enemies get into that close range. But for the most part, he's primarily tapping the weapon and he's converting to sprays almost not at all. Now, that being said, while this is a lot of different information about the Vandal, let's get into 5 actionable tips that you can incorporate to start to pop off with the Vandal right away. Now, the first and biggest mistake that I see when it comes to using the Vandal is when you know you're going to get swung or you highly suspect you're going to get swung, a lot of Vandal users will actually put their crosshair far too close to the wall. You need to imagine where the enemy would end up when they're swinging out to challenge you. Putting your crosshair far too close to that wall is going to have the enemy swing past you, and you're never going to be able to react in time to click that head unless you're like an absolute god. You see, as enemies turn a corner and swing it wide, as they slow down to counter strafe themselves, that's the easiest time for you to shut them down because they're not going to be moving at maximum speed, and there's a tiny window of time before they can fire. A lot of times players will put their crosshair too close to the wall, the enemy will swing it wide, and during the time that you're flicking or moving your crosshair to the right, they are counter strafing at the same time, and they can get that shot off faster than you can get to their head. Now, if your crosshair is already out and it's already where enemies would be swinging out, it's far easier for you to challenge them. Now, it's one thing when you're like slicing the pie on an angle, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when enemies are likely to swing out or where you're putting your crosshair to challenge enemies who are going to peek the angle. Now, the next thing that you need to start using and abusing when you're using the Vandal is abuse and set up in those really far angles, especially versus non-opping enemies. Think about something like screens on split, where you can hold yourself incredibly far from where the enemy would peek you, and unless they have a Vandal, of course, they're never going to be able to challenge you, and the majority of the time, they're not going to be pre-aiming that angle at all because it's so far away, especially if you're standing like in the middle of the door. Now, in scenarios like these, this is a scenario where I think aiming down the sights might be actually better because you're not trying to really spray enemies at all. You're trying to connect tap style with headshots and then have a flexible weapon for swinging enemies down the line. Now, on top of this, something to consider about the Vandal in the first place is it's one of the few weapons that can actually challenge an op if you're pre-aiming an angle you're swinging. If you have perfect counter strafing and perfect crosshair placement and you pre-aim an angle where an opper is setting up, you can shut them down, especially if you set it up with something like a flash or different things like that. Now, the next big mistake that is probably preventing you from popping off with the Vandal in each and every one of your games is consistently trying to transfer or control your spray from one target to the next, as you see players do a lot on the Phantom. Now, this can work in some scenarios where the second target that you're flicking to is like maybe 20 HP and you only need to hit one shot, but most of the time, you should be getting that first kill, resetting all your aim, resetting your positioning, resetting your movement, and then going for another targeted burst on the other enemy. It is not like the Phantom where you can run in guns blazing, trying to convert one spray to the next and flicking to enemies mid-spray. That is almost never going to get you a kill, and if you want to kill one person and flick, you need to be stopping that fire and using that time to get that recoil compensation time all the way through. Now, the next big mistake that you are constantly making with the Vandal, and it's spraying through smokes too long. Now, yes, you can spray through the smoke with a Vandal every once in a while. However, you should not be doing this more than like maybe even half a second, because if you are consistently spraying through smokes, maybe enemies at your rank right now aren't punishing you, but when you get to a certain rank, enemies will start to fire back with Phantoms. And that's one of the big weaknesses of the Vandal, is that it shows enemies exactly where the bullets are coming from and they can return fire incredibly easily. This is why if you are going to be spraying through smokes, you should be doing it either one with the team or two in really tiny bursts before you reposition accordingly. Now, the last and most important tip to start to pop off with the Vandal, and it's something that I'm gonna keep reiterating on it because it's so punishing if you don't master on the Vandal, it's crosshair placement and counter strafing. These are the two things that are really the most important, and specifically on the Vandal, if you don't have these right, they're incredibly punishing. Do yourself a favor and go look at any of the top streamers, go look at someone like Tens, and go watch some of his Vandal gameplay. Most of the time when he's setting up an engagement, he's not even moving his crosshair all that much because it's already in the general area, if not perfectly on where an enemy is going to peek from. On top of that, you often want to be swinging angles with a point of contact or a point where you imagine an enemy to be already in your mind, so you could already be counter strafing and setting it up perfectly right as you swing the corner, and you don't have to take in information and process it and then adjust your aim accordingly. Now, on top of this, I would highly suggest practicing in the free-for-all mode, specifically taking a couple shots and moving, taking a couple shots and moving again. And honestly, when you're practicing, you might even want to unbind your crouch if you have a problem with crouching every single time you get into a spray battle, because it's a really bad habit, especially with the Vandal, that's gonna take away a lot of the power level of the weapon and prevent you from converting on a lot of these kills that you should be able to get with ease. Now, that being said, our top 100 Radiant player Tanner uses the Vandal all the time on his stream, and he's done tons of in-depth VOD reviews where he showcases tons of the fundamentals that you need to start popping off on the Vandal in the links down below on the Game Leap website. So do yourself a favor and go check it out. But thanks so much for coming by. If you have any questions, definitely leave them in the comments down below. That's all we got for you today. I'm Coach Mills, and until next time.